When I first started looking at this opportunity for China, one of the things I was at our Passionist novitiate in West Hartford, Connecticut. I sat down with this priest, Linus Lombard, who had been in the 1950s in China, and I said, you know, I think I'm going to look. I had come to understand the archives for the Passionists as a young man and interested in history. And I said, I think I'm going to learn everything about China. I never had college course, never had any understanding of China. And he was sitting there, he was a heavyset guy, looked sort of like Buddha. And I said, I'm going to learn everything about China. He looked at me and just laughed. He says, you'll never learn anything about China. You'll never learn everything about China. I said, what do you mean? I thought I'd be a real compliment to this guy. And he says, if you try to learn everything about China, it'll kill you. And I was stunned. I was like 23, 24 years old. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, if you want to learn about China, let China love you. And that was fun. So as the years have gone by, terms I've learned, Zhongguo for China, Guanxi for relationship, and a key term is Luan for chaos. I think I'm a 20th century China scholar, so that's how this idea of chaos, I think, is so key. My point in this short presentation is to start with the Linus Lombard, Let China Love You. But what I found in these years of research since the mid-70s, and this is my quote, I'll take credit for this quote, not Linus Lombard. This is what I would say. More and more, I see the Chinese narrative of Catholic faith and belief as a dialogue with the overall China historical narrative. What I mean by that is if you go to the website of the United States China Catholic Association and you click on the area here, it says Missionaries to China with United States and Canadian Heritage, you'll find that over 30 religious congregations of men and women with laity since 1900 have been in process with China. So this is totally unexplored. It's very exciting as a possibility to think about all these different religious orders, not only for the impact and the historical dynamics, but anytime anyone goes to China and you know the names of these orders, the local Chinese people and other people can tell you about the relationship in their memory that still matters. Knowing about these 30 religious congregations, this is just the United States venture. This is a world venture, and world experience and world encounter. So this is very important. This is an unexplored, rich territory for PhDs, for just people in high schools. You can go to this area and you can explore this academically. The application for this is genuine and important. So here's what I think is the academic moment now in 2024. There's a religious archival crisis. What I mean is access and preservation now for religious, and I'm just basically talking about the Catholic boys. The Protestant aspect is also very genuine, but let's stick with the Catholic moment. The access and preservation, especially with digitization, now means actually that if this isn't done, we have a lost opportunity to preserve this material. And going back to what I first said, this is a Chinese narrative, not necessarily a gospel narrative. We hold this narrative for China. Second point is digital photography means when you see the images of the people, the missionaries, the public, the civic, and the political actors of China, they are resurrected. So much so that when I'm in China at times, over the course of these years, if I'm giving a presentation and give it at times in various places in advance, I'm told, do not use that image because of the sensitivity. I'm fine with that, because the larger story, the larger arc is the principle here. And it's changed over time, so I don't get worried about it. My point is to enter into the dialogue and opportunity. Where's the historical reference reset? The National Archives of the United States, Archives 2 especially, in College Park, if you go into the State Department policy and all the consulates, archives are enriched with religious narratives. And the consulate aspects have a very important aspect. Right now, Greta Fry is talking about the China Historical Christian Database at Boston University. That's important as a historical reset to understand how this is all taking place. In China itself, access to China provincial and government archives is a missionary relationship, and then independent archives that people or families have is another one. I spoke in my panel yesterday with Tony Clark and Wu Shaoxin about scholar disillusionment. So this hope and this practicality also has some real issues. Religious relationships are now more sensitive globally among believers and non-believers. And this relates to scholarship. So anytime we talk, we have to be realizing that sensitivity does matter and people are going to have opinions. And that's why we're in the discussion in the first place. Relationship to social media options. Anytime we get into historical discourse, what's going to happen is the media, rightly or wrongly, will enter into it. There's a real possibility that we don't refrain from being engaged with the media and the media being engaged with us as historians. But we have to educate the media because many people who study China do not know anything about China as media people. So our task, our opportunity is really to educate and ask basic questions to give basic answers and know how to assist the media. The media's job is to report, and so we are in a perfect situation with our skills as a historian to educate, and the media is public and education on its various platforms, no matter its own trajectory of analysis or interpretation or commentary. Hesitancy to do that, to work with the media, is a missed opportunity. A quick reaction, though, to work with the media or other people or other voices or to accept opportunities to speak may be imprudent. Sometimes the best thing a historian can do is say no. Let your ego stand aside in academic and realize that the public discourse might be better in a private way. Then the public relations requires that everyone be nuanced, diplomatic, listen, speak, your presence. You have to educate and receive. Let me jump forward here and just conclude with one story here, because I think it's very practical for all of us. The Communist Liberation Revolution, 1949, Fathers Marcellus White, Passionist, and Justin Garvey were released. They were expelled in November 1955, and they crossed at the Low Wu Bridge. So this is them crossing after 2 years in solitary confinement. They were released through the Geneva Accords of 1955, and they crossed at the Low Wu Bridge, and this is a book on that, The Bridge of Low Wu. So, in April, I was in going from Shenzhen to Hong Kong. I was with Naomi Thurston at the moment, who we'll hear later. And we're waiting, and I said, wait, Naomi, wait, get a stop. And she's looking at me like, what are you doing? And I took out my camera, and I said, this is an important place in boundary crossing in history. This is where people are in transit between boundaries, and especially for missionary history, this is the place where freedom was an opportunity for people who had suffered. This is part of the present day narrative, and so I took this photo waiting at the transit entry to go on the subway or the train into Hong Kong. So this Lo Wu is still an important bridge crossing, and we are talking about bridges and relationship. Last 2 points. Thomas Berry, who's a famous Passionist and eco-theologian, was part of the 1948 group, but he had to return and then went to eco-theology. And so you see his image there. In World Mission Magazine, he published an article, and this has been a very inspiring, 2 articles he wrote are very inspiring to me. I quoted this in my PhD dissertation defense at Georgetown in 1992. They asked me about the Long March and importance. And I quoted Thomas Berry's article in Cross Current in 1975, and he says it's a spiritual pilgrimage. Well, my committee did not know what to do with that one. And I said, it's a sacred pilgrimage that everybody goes on, and this is a sacred pilgrimage that goes along with any narrative. And then in 56, he wrote in World Mission, and this is a radical statement. Think of 1956 as being a scholar in the United States. He says, communist or no communist, we must do the work of sinology. That's still true today. Everyone says, forget about this, communist, non-communist. Sinology, China matters, and that is the challenge of this. So the last aspects are techno-knowledge. Now more than ever, people who do academic scholarship have to be aware that sharing and monitoring is pervasive. We have to realize that everything we say will be interpreted all the time, every time. That puts tremendous responsibility on us, and excitement, and fun. Oppressive, as well as open governments, increasingly curtail academic inquiry and freedom in the name of security. Security is used by open and oppressive governments for the same reason. Historians and academics now are living with increased fear. That's true. Public lectures, publishing, social media, and artificial intelligence are reshaping the way that we invest and learn on intellectual exchange. And the last point I would say, those are the cautions and the anxieties, but if we look at this idea of bridge building with Tara Ricci in 2024, how would we, using this great book on friendship, 100 Maxims for a Chinese Prince, how would we rewrite this book? So academics, I would say, must seek ways to nurture and sustain hope, possess a moral purpose to raise consciousness of an interdisciplinary imagination, advocate human concerns with safety and inspiration, encourage, participate, and welcome international exchange. Thank you.
When I was a young boy, my grandmother could never wake me up. I just loved to sleep in. And she learned how to do it, and that was by cooking bacon. And I would smell the bacon, and I woke up and it took me like half a second to run into the kitchen. And I bring that up because, you know, we all know that if you warm something up, you know, the flavor comes out and the smell comes out. When I was a young student living in Taipei, the first book I read from cover to cover was the Analects of Confucius. I was walking through the street, reading the Liu like this, trying to get through the text, and then a gentleman in Taiwan grabbed me and said, Liao Qi, like that's just awesome. Like someone's still reading the Analects. And, but there was a passage that struck me because I was thinking even then, as an aspiring academic, why do I do this? There was a passage, 自曰, 问无而知新. If you heat up the past, then you know the present, right? It's sort of like that bacon, you warm it up and all the meaning comes out of it. And that passage, 问无而知新, became to me the motto of why I'm an academic. Because we all need to know why we're studying. We all need to know why we're here, right? So that for me is just kind of a motto. Also, there are two, so today, just very briefly, I just scribbled down 4 quotes, 2, 3 in, 5 maybe, 3 in Chinese and 2 in Latin. The second one is 活到老，学到老. Live until you're old. And I think if you really want to translate this perfectly, it says, if you live until you're old, you should study until you're old. That is, it's really our duty as humans, academics or not academics, to always learn. This is, I think this is awesome. When I tell my students, how does the Analects of Confucius begin? 学而时习之，不亦乐乎. To study and then review what you study, is that not a joy? And some people think that studying is not a joy, but certainly Confucius did. So, 获到老，学到老. And the next one I think is even more important than first two, and that is 学而后知不足. When you learn, you encounter what you don't know. And that's the nature of learning, right? 学而后知不足. When you learn, you know how much you don't know. And every one of us, the more books we read, the more we think, oh gosh, I just don't know anything. And if there's anything I want to tell you about being an academic, I think the better you are at being an academic, the less you feel like an academic. Because you truly come to the conclusion, I just don't really know anything. So, and then the other thing that really strikes me, and this is just more about China, there's a great Jesuit named Amiot, and he was a brilliant intellectual, a polyglot. I think all academics are in a way, polyglots. We speak academic language, we speak popular language. When I teach, sometimes the word like appears in more sentences than when I'm giving an academic talk. But Amiot was faced with a huge dilemma. When McCartney had his mission in the late 18th century, 1793, was going to China to try and open up trade with the Emperor of China, all the British went to Amiot, this French Jesuit, brilliant, spoke fluent Chinese, Russian, Latin, obviously French. He met with the British and he said, you all are making every possible mistake in how you're dealing with China. Everything you're doing is wrong. And the British said, well, what do you mean by that? And Amiot said, just imagine that whatever your instincts are as a Westerner, do the opposite. Do the opposite and then you'll be perfect in the Chinese context. Do the opposite of your instincts. Now, I don't think he was trying to say that the Chinese are totally different than the Westerners, but culturally there are a lot of differences. The sentence I hear so often in Beijing is, 文化沟通那么大, like the cultural gap is huge. Well, this moment where Amiot experienced all of these Western mistakes was confirmed. Things fell apart. Things fell apart. And then we had things like opium wars and Taiping rebellions and unequal treaties and all sorts of things because of cultural insensitivity and cultural illiteracy. But before he died, Amiot wrote something that was his advice to everyone who ever thinks about China. In Latin, he wrote this, Abi viator congratulare mortuis, condole vivis oro pro omnibus, mirare et tace. Depart. First thing he says is just go there. Like Cardinal Chao said, a bridge is useless unless you cross it. Just go there. Congratulare mortuis. Be appreciative of those who have died. Congratulate the dead. Be sympathetic with those who are living. Pray for everyone. He meant that. Pray for everyone. And then remain silent. His point was to be an academic, to be anyone, you have to succumb to moments of silence. Now, I'm a third order Dominican, so they're called the Order of Preachers. So we're supposed to say things. Right? So I have two things working against me when I want to be silent. Right? One is all of my Dominican friends and brothers and sisters in the Dominican order always say, go out and preach, go out and, even if it's just a lecture, go out and say things. And the second curse is I'm called a professor, so I'm called to profess things, right? So this idea of being silent is sometimes quite a challenge. But I think it's crucial that we find places for that. And then finally, looking at my time, I have 2.5 minutes. Aquinas wrote what is now one of the great mottos of the Order of Preachers, Contemplare et contemplata aliis tradere. Think about things, learn things, and then share what you've learned. So to be, I think, an intellectual, or to be an academic, or to be a human person, I think it's our duty to share what we know. We must do that. It's part of the exchange of sharing our stories. So that is a really important thing. I'm really struck with Father Rob's idea about the Luofu Bridge. We should have made more of that bridge. Because in our theme here, talking about bridges, that bridge could have figured in, I think, a lot more. Well, the last thing I want to say is when I'm in China, by conclusion, when I'm in China, I'm typically in archives, right? So I'm in Tianjin, I'm in Beijing, I'm sometimes in France, Rome, and I'm working in archives, and I spend hours and hours looking at old documents. I'm one of those people who, when I open a book, I smell it, especially if it's old. I have this bibliophilia where I love everything about old things, especially old books. But when I'm in China, I always have a journal with me, and I write down everything I do with everyone I meet. And I take their business cards and keep them in my journals. I have like 150 of these journals. And I've met a lot of people in China. And all the notes, whenever they give me something, if it's paper, it goes into my journals. And when I keep these notes, I just stuff them in a drawer in my office. But my students took all of my notes and they put them together and said, why don't you publish these? And they're just my reflections during my research, going from village to village in China. I'm not promoting my book. It's not what I'm doing here. But this book is called China's Catholics in an Era of Transformation, Observations of a, quote, outsider. And it's something I wrote that was an attempt as an academic to write something that is accessible, something that isn't the scholarly. When I went to my first conference, I didn't understand anyone said as a young graduate student. It was all about Derrida and Foucault and the signifier slipping under the signified and Wittgenstein's, the limits of our world and the limits of our language. And after a while, my head spun and I thought, I understand everything, but how does that really help us? So, in any case, I wrote this text of stories based on my experiences, and I think as academics, we always need to be mindful of Wengu'er Chixing, warm up the past, so that we understand the present. So, thanks.
Thank you all for being here. This is a very peculiar kind of conference because I didn't have to write any notes to prepare. And we're being recorded, unfortunately, so it could go very well or very badly. I have a kind of complicated journey coming to where I am today, but I won't get into that. My dissertation as a Catholic theologian was on the probably very familiar figure to you, John C.H. Wu of Wu Jingxiong. The title of my dissertation is The Art of Dialogue and Proclamation, a Case Study with John C.H. Wu. Now, after completing, so I graduated in December of last year. Now, after completing that dissertation, I went on to give some professional talks at other conferences about Lin Yitang and Sun Yat-sen. They were very well received by American scholars. So what I benefited the most from studying this period and these people, really generation of giants of Chinese intellectuals, is actually two things. First is the importance of that history. We cannot understand our current international situation without understanding that politically formative period. How that history has shaped the psychology of the Chinese government and Chinese people today, and how that period has really shaped our own histories. So if there is a strong animosity between China and the West, in order to understand that, make sense of it, and to contribute to a solution, we must go back and see what happened to China 100 years ago. Another thing I learned from these people is that in very polite ways, all of them were very polite, as Chinese Confucians would be, maybe with the exception of Lin Yitang. He could be a little more forthright and sarcastic, being the master of humor. But all of them very politely tried to communicate to the West that China had beautiful things to offer to the West. Not only to Western society, but also to the church. So with that research in the background, I recently started an even more scary, courageous, brave academic venture, which is the comparative study of Buddhism and Christianity. So I'm in the middle of this project where I compare Pure Land Buddhism, which is the most popular form of Mahayana Buddhism in East Asia, but the least familiar to a Western audience. So with that on one side, and Christian spirituality, especially going back to the patristics on the other. So I studied the Jesus Prayer. Why I say the Jesus Prayer? Many Christians don't know what the Jesus Prayer is. And how is the Jesus Prayer similar and different from the Buddhist practice? Well, what is the Buddhist practice? Some of you probably know some Buddhists. What is the most common form of greeting when Buddhists meet each other? Does anybody know? What do they say to each other? It doesn't matter what form of Buddhism they practice. This is the most common form of greeting among Buddhists in China. Nobody? Yeah, they bow to each other slightly and they say, Amitabha. Now imagine, this is an example of why I like this comparative study. Imagine if Christians meet each other, bow each other, and say, Jesus. This is why they say Amitabha to each other. It's a greeting of peace. It is a greeting that recognizes that everyone is a Buddha. So Amitabha is one of their most revered, beloved Buddhas who has compassion for all living beings in the infinite universe. It's a very similar salvific figure to Christ. And they recognize each other as that Buddha. And imagine if Christians do the same. See each other and call each other Jesus. But in the West, we have the very strange opposite phenomenon of taking the Lord's name in vain. Okay, so that's my research. My teaching, I have taught, I work at the University of Dayton as an adjunct professor right now, so I'm only an academic wannabe. I have taught Introduction to Religious Studies and Theology to freshman students. They have to take this class. Most of them don't want to be there. It's a big challenge trying to communicate something to them of value. I have also taught several semesters Introduction to Chinese Traditions using very basic traditional texts such as the Analects, the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Zhuangzi, and a little bit of the Buddhist Sutras. I have taught a class on Zen Buddhism with Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese Buddhist, possibly the most well-known Buddhist in the West, besides the Dalai Lama. And I've also taught a class on Taoism with the University of Oklahoma online. I never wanted to teach online, but I wanted to give that a try because the subject was Taoism. One thing that I've noticed and my students have noticed is the difference between the Western intellectual tradition and the Chinese. Chinese are very pragmatic people, and our philosophy, our spirituality have been very concrete, very practical. Our topmost concern is how to live well, is how to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. So teaching these subjects has been a great pleasure, greatest pleasure in my life so far. I see my mission as a researcher and as a teacher as being a cultural ambassador. Orientalists are still very necessary, as Rob said. I want to be that bridge for my students here in the United States. I'm very grateful to the Catholic Church, how much the Church has given to me, how much the Church has supported me in my intellectual journey. how many good people, Catholics, Chinese or not, have supported me in this life journey really attests to the Catholicity of Catholicism. So I want to give something back to the Catholic Church. And I want to give something back to this country that has adopted me. And the way that I want to do that is by sharing the gifts that I have been fortunate enough to retrieve through my intellectual pursuits. I want to share the beauty of Chinese wisdom with my students. And I have to tell you, the American students absolutely love it. I look forward to teaching every single time. Don't know what's going to happen in the classroom, but every semester, there will be a few students who tell me, at the beginning of the semester, no idea why I'm in this class, no idea even what the title of the class is that they have picked on their schedule, because it fits their schedule. By the end of the semester, they have appreciated something very profoundly from the class. They have received something they could use for the rest of their lives. Now, not everyone says that, but there are always a few who say that. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Father Ron, Dr. Clark, and Dr. Kensley. Thanks for your sharing. It's really inspiring. So I have, the bridge of lawful. It's really inspiring me now. Because 1949, they left China across the bridge to Hong Kong. But today, so many people cross the river to America. So people come to this place, the beautiful place. So they search for the better life, for the freedom, for the future, So I'm wondering, in some way, what can we help them, when they come here with their family, the first generation, they come to this beautiful place. In what way we can help them? I work in Brooklyn, in my parish. Recently, I found out in the new technology, Dr. also said to share what you learn, to share what you know. The social teaching is really lack in our culture in China, for the Catholics. I try, how can we promote the social teaching for the Chinese in America? How can help them, this area to use WeChat, use this way, how can we promote the social teaching? So I try to do this way. So thank you for your sharing. I have no question, but really help me to know how we can evangelize and to educate them in America instead of in China. And according to some statistics, only in New York, 500,000 Chinese live there. 500,000 Chinese live in New York. Thank you.
I didn't know that I was born with the beginning of the analytics, Dr. Clark. I always loved learning. I couldn't wait for school, from grade school to college to graduate school. But I didn't know until this morning when Father Rob talked about the bridge from Cardinal Chow's wonderful talk, that I'm a bridge builder because I love learning, but I long to share it with ordinary people. All the academic terminology, I used to think, can't we talk more plainly? Can't we talk more just to ordinary people, because they all have good brains, but we need just ordinary language to speak clearly. So I just want to talk that the USCCA provides some wonderful resources for us to keep learning, to be lifelong learners. And the book circle that we started a few years ago at one of our board meetings, all the business, we had to take care of all the business and and I said at the end of the meeting, how can we educate ourselves more about China and about the church in China? And someone said, well, go do it. So I said, well, let's start conversations on books or articles in books and share them. So we did. We just started reading a book. And one of the big books we read was John C.H. Wu, which Kathy just talked about. With Matteo Ricci, I would put up John C.H. Wu as the pillar, one of the pillars of our whole organization to understanding China. And so we read Beyond East and West, and you can even get a copy, a free copy, right out there by becoming an affiliate today. But so we started just an easy way to keep learning. 1 hour a month on a Saturday morning. And we now, with COVID and the internet, we have conversations with people from China, Hong Kong, one came from Vietnam. So we planned the timing to start at 7 a.m. in Dr. Clark's West Coast. And we had people from China and Hong Kong at 10 p.m. So we could, it's so fun to just listen to all different people from around the world and all different academic strata sharing their ideas on these carefully chosen paragraphs of a book or articles. And you can join these book circles. So this is one way we take the academic world and make it shareable with our learning.
So that's very important. If you become an affiliate, you certainly get all the information about book circles and so forth. But even if you don't become an affiliate, you can look at our website and the information about that and so forth. For anyone is welcome to come. So perhaps we can open it to everyone else. The conversation about how to take some of the knowledge that's been actually generated here and bring it to a wider group, a wider public.
Hi everyone. So my name is Amy O. I come from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So my question to the panel is this. Well, a lot of you are actually doing research on Chinese. So, but I think that, okay, well, you're also Catholic or Christian academics. And as academics, you are not only just researchers, you are also educators so that we influence our students and our colleagues through different ways, not just our research. But I realize, a lot of times as academics, Catholic or Christian academics, the moment that we enter the university, at least for me, most of the time I will throw away my Catholic or Christian identity. The moment I enter my university, I am a professor, I am academic. So, and I follow the norms and rules for that kind of values. So my question to you, so how can we actually live up our Christian or Catholic professor identity in the academia so that we can actually influence not through our research, but also through influencing our students? The reason why I ask about this is because sometimes I don't even know that I have colleagues who are Christian or Catholic. They're all like undergrounds. you know, so that is how much we have thrown away our identity when we go to the university. So what do you think about that, and how can we, you know, based on your years of experiences now?
I gave a present, that's a great question. And I think, you know, I'm a Catholic priest, and I've taught a lot of places. I'm like you, Kathy, I've been an adjunct forever. And the place that freed me in my Catholic identity as a professor was China. Because I couldn't tell people. I was there in 2007, 2008. I was in Chongqing. And I just had the most free experience because no one really cared or really understood that I was a priest. And if I talked about religion, they looked at me and moved on to the next topic. And it was up to them to sort of deal with it. The other thing that's in the American universities, at Catholic universities, some students have told me, and I don't wear a collar when I teach. I wear, you know, my Buddhist tie. That always at least gets conversation going. And some students have criticized me because I use archives, Catholic or Protestant religious archives in my class. You know, I teach 20th century, 1800 to 20th century China, and everybody's in China. I mean, and so the Catholics and the missionary aspects are probably some of the most violent scripts, but it's about religion. And I get pretty impassioned, you know, I can be boring. Most days I get a lot excited, and they think, my goodness, like, this is all about religion. It's like preaching. I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, you gotta figure this out. You gotta respond to this. If your question is a question about religion, and this is in the documents, you got the problem. You know, you have the opportunity, you have the reaction. So that's one of the key things for me that I have to really balance. And I try my best to let the documents speak. But if I have to interpret that, boy, I'll tell you, the Shanahan diary story, that brings people into thinking twice. Prison narratives, that brings people into thinking twice. The other aspect is refugees. That normalizes things, and then of course, where Tony's good with this is boxers, you know, and saints, and Lu Long, and his graphic novel, all that sort of thing. So I think I think you have to let the documents speak, but when they ask you, you become impassioned with your story and ask them how to respond. Religion's part of the public discourse. The public has to learn how to deal with religion. And that's our job as professors.
So, thank you for that question, because I'm a professor, and I've taught at 2 state schools. And I think that at 57, my conclusion is stop hiding, just be who you are. And the reason I say that is, you know, when I was a grad student, an undergraduate student, we were taught to always refer to yourself in writing as the author says, right? The author argues that, or the author states, and now everyone just uses the pronoun I, right? Because I think we've grown and evolved. Academics has this flawed culture of sort of denying parts of who we are. You can be objective, and you can be a Christian. In fact, I think that the more you are holistically who you are, the more objective and liberated you can be to make assertions. I publish about the Han Dynasty sometimes. I don't identify myself as a Catholic. But we also, and this is my last point about this, as a professor, we're very aware of identity discourse. So your identity discourse is to call out your identities, multiple identities. Why can't I actually be honest about my own faith tradition within that discourse of identities? So I don't know, I guess I understand the dilemma, and there's a fear in academia that if I identify as a Catholic, the glass ceiling will suddenly appear. No promotion. And let me, my own personal story is when I was writing my first book on saints at an R1 state school, and my chair summoned me to his office and said, "We didn't hire you to write about a religious topic. No one will read your book. In fact, if you write about Catholicism in China, no one will ever read your books." And I have, to this moment, more readers than anyone in my department. So sometimes we just have to courageously go forward. And there are readers, and there is, it's okay to be who you are.
Almost done. I'll say one final. Oh, Kathy, please.
Thank you. Thank you. One thing I've learned very recently is there is a difference between Christian learning and learning to be a Christian. I'm a professor, I'm a Catholic professor, but at the same time, I'm also a fellow student of the faith. So that's helpful for me to keep in mind. I don't necessarily have to give something Catholic to my students. We're in this journey together. St. Francis of Assisi says, preach the gospel, use words if necessary. That's also helpful. What the Chinese wisdom has taught me is that if religion is to be powerful, it has to be real, it has to be alive. It has to be in the way we carry ourselves, in the way we speak, in the way that we look at each other, in the things that we say and the things that we don't say. So there are just infinite ways that we keep cultivating ourselves, and somehow I think that light is going to shine through. I remember there was one time a colleague of mine was talking with me, and he was reflecting on the way he taught, and he felt guilty because being an academic, doing a lot of religious studies stuff, he felt guilty about not sharing Christ, not holding Christ up as much as he desired for the students. So he asked this question, how can I make sure that Christ is present among my students? And I told him, I said, well, Christ is never far from anyone. Christ is not far from your students. He's not far from us, and he's never far from us, right? If we are doing things well, even if we're just cooking, Christ is not far from us. One more thing I would like to say is that I realize that Amy, you're not a teacher of theology, you're actually a professor of business. So how do you live out your Catholic identity in that situation? Our students are suffering. I think if as teachers we realize our students are suffering, and if we are attentive to that, then our compassion for them will make a tremendous difference.
Pardon me. Okay, so this is about at the end. My little but very quick reflection on this is that when you study China, you talk about being a bridge builder. To be a bridge builder, you have to go to the edge. You have to go to the edge of your culture, and then if you're lucky to get to the other side, it's the edge of the other. And you're always on the edge. The edge of academia, on the edge of people in China, the people I interact with are miscreants, dissidents, people who go to jail, not the heart of Chinese culture, not the heart of academia. And also a part of being a good researcher, I believe, is actually not building bridges. I don't believe in building, I don't build bridges. I cross the river by feeling the stones. That's what Deng Xiaoping says. You shuffle along, feeling your way, don't know what the hell you're doing, and maybe you'll get to the other side, maybe not. So real research is plunging into the unknown and going to the edge and finding the edge elsewhere, and trying to communicate the thrill of that to ordinary people. Okay, so we've reached the end of this session, and another one is starting like right now. It should be finally in, and we have a final inspiring keynote speech, and